What if the most consequential social movement of the 21st century did not begin on a Minneapolis sidewalk in May of 2020, but inside a Netflix writer's room 4 years earlier? What if television no longer reflects culture, but rehearses it? What if the streaming platform has become the unconscious of the social body, dreaming our crises before we live them? Orange is the new black surfaces with a deceptive ordinariness. We meet Piper Chapman, blonde, articulate, upper middle class, fundamentally unthreatening. She is the audience surrogate that no one demands, the protagonist that demographic data designs in advance. Her ordinariness is not a flaw of the show, it is its most weaponized feature. Familiarity is the anesthetic, and the anesthetic is what allows the surgery to begin. Before the viewer can object, before the viewer can categorize the show as political or ideological or for someone else, they are already inside. The Trojan horse does not announce itself. It is admitted at the gate. As the show progresses, something strange happens. Piper begins to recede. The camera, like a slow conveyor belt, drifts to Lorna, to Tasty, to Red, to Sophia, to Alex, to Poussey. Each woman becomes the protagonist for an episode, an arc, a memory. The singular hero, that great Western individualist, often masculine invention, quietly dissolves into a chorus. This is not accidental. The show is teaching the viewer how to redistribute attention. It is rewiring the viewer's eye to track many bodies at once, to grant interiority to faces that mainstream television had previously rendered as background. By the time the politics arrive, the viewer is already a collectivist by viewing habit. The pedagogy precedes the polemic. The genius of the show is structural. Piper is the gate. Once the viewer is inside, the show smuggles in the stories that mainstream American television had refused to tell. The queer woman whose desire is not played for spectacle, the trans woman of color whose dignity is not contingent on the audience's discomfort, the undocumented woman swallowed by ICE custody, the addict mourned without moralization, the black woman whose interior life is rendered with the same cinematic grammar previously reserved for white men. The Trojan horse does not deceive its audience. It bypasses their immune system. By the time the viewer realizes what the show is actually about, the rewiring has already happened. They have already been changed. The show does not merely depict the prison, it aestheticizes it into a moral organism. The corruption is not anomalous, it is structural. The sexual violence is not sensational, it is procedural. The viewer is forced to witness, episode after episode, that the carceral state is not a glitch in American democracy, but its load-bearing wall. ICE is shown not as a bureaucratic agency, but as a mechanism of erasure. The guards are not bad apples, they are products of a soil. This is the pedagogy beneath the entertainment. The show is teaching the viewer to see the system, not the individual, as the perpetrator. That single shift in the viewer's moral framework, from individual evil to structural evil, is the precondition for any abolitionist movement that follows. You cannot demand the end of a thing you have not yet learned to see. Poussey Washington is the show's moral center long before her death. She is curious, literate, multilingual, tender, romantic. She quotes books. She speaks German. She loves a woman named Soso with a softness the show refuses to ironize. She dreams of opening a bookstore in New York, of a life after the sentence. The show invests in her interiority with a patience that is, in the context of mainstream American television, almost unprecedented for a young black queer woman. This investment is not sentimental. It is preparatory. The audience is being asked to fall in love. They are being trained to grieve. The show is laying foundation for a loss it has not yet announced. In the season 4 finale, a guard pins Poussey to the cafeteria floor during a peaceful protest. He is not cartoonishly malicious. He is panicked, undertrained, overpowered by his own institutional position. His weight presses on her back, on her neck. She cannot breathe. She says so. He does not move. She dies on the floor of a prison cafeteria for a non-violent action in a system she did not design, while the woman she loved watched from across the room. The episode aired in June of 2016. It detonated. Viewers wept publicly. Critics wrote essays. The show had performed an autopsy on the American carceral state in a single, unbearable scene. The image entered the cultural bloodstream, and there it waited. 4 years later, in May of 2020, a Minneapolis police officer knelt on the neck of George Floyd for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. He could not breathe. He said so. The officer did not move. The pattern is not merely metaphorical. It is morphological. The body position, the duration, the witnesses, the words, the failure of surrounding officials to intervene, the cinematic framing of bystander phones echoing the cinematic framing of the show's cameras. To watch the Poussey scene and then the Floyd footage is to experience an uncanny doubling, as if reality were performing a cover version of fiction. One does not need to claim conspiracy to register this. One need only ask the harder question, what does it mean that the collective imagination had already rehearsed this exact death 4 years before it occurred? This is the asymmetrical claim. Mass media is no longer simply representational, it is calibrational. A streaming platform, by virtue of its scale and its algorithmic precision, functions as a tuning fork for the collective nervous system. When tens of millions of viewers absorb the same emotional event in the same week, a kind of latent affect is installed in the culture, a potential energy in the literal physical sense. It does not demand release, it waits. When a structurally similar real-world event eventually occurs, that latent affect is converted into kinetic political energy at a velocity and scale that would have been impossible without the prior media rehearsal. The show did not cause the movement. The show pre-tuned the instrument that the movement would later play. Whether by accident, by artistic intuition, or by something more deliberate, the question itself becomes secondary to the structural fact. Orange is the New Black calibrated the American viewing public to recognize, grieve, and mobilize around exactly the kind of death that would soon arrive on a Minneapolis sidewalk. The streaming platform did not predict the future. It preloaded it. Black Lives Matter became, by several measurements, the largest protest movement in American history. The streets filled, statues fell, corporations rewrote their landing pages overnight. Cities debated abolition out loud for the first time in a century. Something extraordinary occurred, and something also unsettling. Because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Every contemporary social movement now arrives with a soundtrack, a cinematic precedent, a streaming archive of pre-rehearsed grief. This does not delegitimize the movement. The pain is real, the injustice is real, the demand is real, and the dead are not metaphors. But the velocity, the aesthetic coherence, the global synchronization, these are the signatures of a culture whose nervous system has been pre-wired by the very platforms it now uses to organize. The final, uncomfortable question is this. In a society where streaming platforms function as the unconscious of the social body, is any movement truly spontaneous? Or are we always, in some sense, performing the dreams that were uploaded into us before we knew we were dreaming? Orange is the New Black is not the cause. But it may be the most legible piece of evidence we have that the boundary between media and movement, between fiction and history, between dream and street, has quietly, irreversibly dissolved. This analysis is offered as an interpretive provocation, not a forensic claim. The morphological parallel between Poussey Washington's fictional death and George Floyd's real death is documented, widely noted, and was acknowledged by the show's writers themselves. The deeper claim, that streaming platforms function as calibration technologies for collective affect, is a theoretical lens, drawing on intellectual traditions from Marshall McLuhan to Jean Baudrillard to Mark Fisher to Cianon Guy. Whether one accepts the strong version of the thesis, that the show prepared the movement, or only its weak version, that the show resonated with what was already coming, Orange is the New Black remains one of the most consequential pieces of media of the streaming era. Not because of what it depicted, but because of what it prepared its viewers to feel. The streaming platform did not invent grief, but it learned, before anyone else, how to install it.